story of Abraham goes back 4,000 years or so. He came from Mesopotamia, what is now Iraq. Abraham was the first future Jew, if you like, to pass through the land of Israel. Lived there, he welcomed his guests there into his tent, and after many wanderings, his descendants returned.
Abraham was a nomadic herdsman and a powerful regional figure who lived in what is now Iraq. Abraham's extensive travels around Israel are recorded in the book of Genesis. For example, he visited Jerusalem and Beersheba. He purchased land from the Hittite population in Hebron, a town just outside Jerusalem, which is one of the most ancient and continually inhabited cities in the world. And finally, Abraham and his wife Sarah, his son Isaac with wife Rebekah, and grandson Jacob with wife Leah were all buried in the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. God's first conversation with Abraham was a directive to go to the land identified by God. Go for yourself from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's home to the land that I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. Following this call, Abraham makes the journey to Israel, which marks the beginning of a special relationship between God and Abraham's family. Abraham is described as an individual who lives by the ideals of justice and goodness. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they will keep the way of God to do justice and judgment. God's promise to Abraham is that his descendants will become a great nation with a mandate to embody the values and ideals of ethical monotheism. And Abraham was given the land of Israel as an everlasting possession to fulfill that mandate. The promise of the land of Israel was repeated to Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses, giving rise to the name the Promised Land. The modern name of the state of Israel is based on the biblical phrase Eretz Yisrael, meaning the land of Israel, which refers to the biblical patriarch Jacob, who was called Israel, and his children, who were known as the Israelites. The borders of the ancient land of Israel, which are somewhat different than the modern-day borders, are defined in the Bible in several places. Abraham's grandson Jacob and his children were forced to leave Israel due to famine and settled in neighboring Egypt, where they were enslaved for 210 years. Around 1300 BCE, the Jewish people under the leadership of Moses were miraculously freed from Egyptian slavery. They began their journey through the desert, back to their ancestral homeland, to the land in which they could fulfill their national destiny, to Israel. The oldest non-biblical reference to the Israelites comes from this time.
One begins to get references in the something like sort of 1,500, 1,600 years before the Christian era in ancient texts. One has in the Egyptian texts and also in the Ugaritic texts, Habiru, Hebrews who make their appearance.
On the reverse side of a large granite slab known as the Stele of Merneptah, who was an ancient Egyptian ruler, is an obituary for the Israelites. Inscribed are the words, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more." Ironically, it is Merneptah who is an unknown king, while the people of Israel have survived and still maintain their connection to Israel 40 centuries later. Moses passed on the leadership to Joshua, who led the Jewish people into the land of Israel. Joshua oversaw the conquering and settlement of the land. The account is described in the biblical book of Joshua, and extensive archaeological research by the likes of Kathleen Kenyon, James Pritchard, and Yigal Yadin support Israelite settlement there during that period. This marked the establishment of the first national Jewish presence in Israel. From this moment on, despite wars, invasions, and exiles, there have always been Jewish people living in the land of Israel. For hundreds of years until a monarchy was appointed, the Jewish people were ruled by a series of judges, such as Samson and Devorah. The tabernacle, the portable temple used by the Israelites, was based in Shiloh for 369 years. At that point, Jerusalem was a non-Jewish city in a Jewish country. King David conquered Jerusalem, and it was designated as the eternal Jewish capital. David then bought the upper part of the hill, above the northern boundary of the city. The purchase is recorded in the Bible in two places, in the second book of Samuel, chapter 24, and the first book of Chronicles, chapter 21. And thanks to the excavations of Kathleen Kenyon and the contemporary archaeologist Eilat Mazar, we actually have artifacts from Jerusalem dating from this time. Jerusalem was not a conventional choice for a capital city. It has none of the advantages of accessibility to trade routes or ports, or even to an adequate water supply. It is hard to defend strategically, and has been conquered 36 times in 3,000 years. See, King David did not choose it as his capital for military or political reasons, but for the spirituality of the city and its centrality to Judaism. In Jewish metaphysical thought, Jerusalem is home of the Even Shtiyah, the foundation stone, believed to be the nexus where the physical and spiritual world meet, where people can connect to God better than any place on earth. Judaism teaches that the dust that formed the first human, Adam, came from this spot, and that the story of the binding of Isaac took place there, as well as other events in the Bible. King David's son, King Solomon, presided over an era of peaceful alliances with neighboring kingdoms, and as a result, the borders of the land of Israel expanded under his rule. He built a number of major cities throughout Israel, including Megiddo, Hatzor, and Gezer. More importantly, King Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem, which stood for 410 years. This temple took the place of the portable sanctuary that had accompanied the Jewish people since their wanderings in the desert, and was built on what was regarded as the holiest site in the world, right atop the foundation stone. Inside the central chamber of the temple, known as the Holy of Holies, was the most sacred object of the Jewish people, the Ark of the Covenant. It contains the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, given by God to the Jewish nation at Mount Sinai. The temple was the venue for all national Jewish practices, and therefore united the Jewish people. 3 times a year, the nation would gather for festive pilgrimages to the temple, which also served as a house of worship for all people, Jews and non-Jews alike. Aside from its physical function as a place of pilgrimage and prayer, the temple had a much deeper spiritual purpose for the Jewish people. Just as Abraham's mission was to teach the world about monotheism, not just as a religious and philosophical concept, but as a practical source for understanding morality and the meaning of life, so too, the Jewish people saw the temple as the epicenter of maintaining a national commitment to living and teaching those values and ideals, a place where they were reminded of their national purpose and spiritual mission. Throughout the 6th century BCE, Assyrian power in the Middle East grew. In approximately 555 BCE, the Assyrians pushed into northern Israel and conquered it, destroying Jewish independence and forcing the first of many exiles for the Jewish people from their land. The southern part of Israel, including Jerusalem and the Temple, remained in Jewish hands. Despite the invasion, the Jewish prophets of this time remained steadfast to the vision of the Jewish people returning to Israel. Although things looked bleak, they spoke of a future time where the Jewish people would again fulfill their divine mission through inhabiting their land and living in accordance with moral values and being a light unto the nations. One of the most famous quotes of the prophet Isaiah is from this time. "From out of Zion shall the law come forth, and the word of God from Jerusalem. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift the sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." When the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians, both northern and southern Israel fell under Babylonian rule. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, and the majority of the Jewish population was exiled to what is now Iraq and Iran. The Persians conquered the Babylonian Empire and allowed the exiled Jewish community to return to Israel and join up with the small Jewish population that had remained. The Jews built a second temple on the same site as the first temple, and it stood for 420 years. At this time, Israel was a sub-district of a Persian province known as Yehud. When the Greeks defeated the Persians, they banned key Jewish practices and defiled the temple. The Hasmonean priestly family led a Jewish revolt against the Greeks. They became known as the Maccabees. This revolt resulted in the formation of an independent Jewish kingdom ruled by the Hasmonean dynasty, which lasted from 165 BCE to 63 BCE. The Maccabees purified and rededicated the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, an event that is still celebrated today by Jews in the holiday of Hanukkah. The Roman Empire emerged as the next superpower and defeated the Greeks. As Rome became stronger, it exerted more power over Israel, which gradually lost its status as an independent Jewish kingdom. This correlated with the Jewish people becoming less connected with their own distinct identity and values. For a short while, Israel was ruled by Roman puppet kings like Herod the Great, but it gradually came under the direct rule of the Roman administration, who renamed it Judea province.
When the Roman Empire expanded into the Eastern Mediterranean, it found a very vigorous, large Jewish community, settled Jewish community there. Really impressive community, which had again overthrown the Seleucid Greeks. It had re-established itself after conquest by Assyrians and Greeks. But the Romans were also determined to destroy it.
The Romans were often callous and brutal in their treatment of their Judean subjects, which led to many Jewish revolts, attempting to throw the Romans out of Israel. The Jewish revolt of 66 of the Common Era against Rome was horrifically defeated by the Roman generals Vespasian and Titus. And in the year 70 of the Common Era, the Romans besieged Jerusalem and destroyed the Second Temple, leaving just part of the Western Wall standing. They looted it, taking many of the holy objects, such as the candelabra, back to Rome. There was enormous loss of life, and the historian Josephus writes that about 1,100,000 Jewish men, women, and children were massacred, and 97,000 Jews were taken captive.
They didn't want an independent Jewish sovereign state, which is what had existed before they came, and so they not only destroyed the temple and printed their coins Judea capta, Judea a captive, but also created the massive dispersal of the Jews.
The forced dispersion of the Jewish population from Israel and destruction of the Second Temple was a pivotal point in Jewish history. On a human level, this massive exile resulted in the Jewish people becoming gradually spread out all over the world. On a national and spiritual level, by destroying the temple, which was the center of Jewish life, the Jews were without a physical focus for their activities. The Romans completely destroyed Jerusalem and rebuilt it based on the Roman town model. They named the city Aelia Capitolina and banned the Jews from Jerusalem in a deliberate attempt to cut them off from their national and spiritual roots. In a further effort to erase the Jewish connection to the land, the Romans changed the name of the country, renaming it Syria Palestina, which evolved into the name Palestine. Palestina is derived from the Philistines, a people who dwelt along the coastal plain, who were constantly at war with the Jews.
The Romans created a province which was called Syria Palestina, the Palestinian Syria, and that's where the word Palestine essentially comes into the political vocabulary. So the Philistines, it's their name which somehow became Palestina. But they weren't Arabs, they weren't Muslims, they were, of course, this was preceding the Muslim era by many hundreds of years.
The Romans maintained persecution against the Jewish people in Israel, which dwindled further and spread throughout the Middle East. While in exile, Jews built vibrant communities, maintaining a strong national identity, despite being outside their national homeland. Nevertheless, a continuous Jewish presence in Israel was maintained, with the Jewish population shifting to the Galilee in the north and the Hebron Hills in the south. The Mishnah, one of Judaism's most important religious texts, was composed in Israel during this period. It was during Roman rule that Christianity developed, initially as a breakaway sect from Judaism. Christianity was later adopted by the Roman Empire.
The Jews who lived in Palestine, in the Holy Land, from the Christian era on, lived often in good relations with the Christians. Of course, the problem for the Jews was that the first Christians were Jews, and the Christian converts were Jews. So the country, if you like, divided between those who remained Jewish, and pugnaciously so, and had their great religious academies, such as the Bnei Brak, and those who became Christian and followed a different path.
During the Middle Ages, the Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople. The Byzantines upheld the Roman policy of excluding Jews from Jerusalem. Islam began in 622 of the Common Era by Muhammad as a religion of the nomadic people of the Arabian Peninsula.
The first contact between Islam and the Muslims on the one hand and the land of Israel on the other came in the years following the death of the Prophet, when under his successors the Islamic State and armies expanded into all the neighboring countries. And obviously one of the first they came to was the borderland northeast of Arabia into what is now Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. And they were soon incorporated in the new Islamic State.
The first Muslims to reach Jerusalem and conquer it from the Christian Byzantines arrive in 638, 4 caliphs or leaders after Muhammad. This conquest marks the beginning of the Muslim presence in Israel.
In the 7th century, the hordes of militant Islam arrived from Mecca and Medina, from what is now Saudi Arabia.
Umar ibn al-Khattab, the caliph, which conquered Eretz Israel in the late 630s, declared that the whole Eretz Israel between the sea and Jordan River is a waqf, means a dormant, holy land for Muslims. So this is what they mean by the sanctity of Eretz Israel for Islam.
The rivalry between Christianity and Islam was very powerful and very effective, not so much because of their differences as because of their resemblances. Here you have two religions with the same Middle Eastern background, with the same Judeo-Christian past, and beyond that, the same background in the ancient civilizations of the Middle East, the same idea of what is meant by such words as prophecy and revelation and scripture. They could understand each other very well. They could argue and understand each other. And there was an argument which went on right through the Middle Ages into modern times.
The church was appalled by the destruction of their holy sites in Jerusalem and across the Holy Land, as well as the advancing Muslim attacks on the Christian Byzantine Empire. And so it began a serious campaign to restore Jerusalem and the Holy Land to Christian rule.
Well, the Christians felt that they had been dislodged by Islam from the regions where they had been the rulers under the great Byzantine Empire based on Constantinople. What is now Israel was an integral part of the Christian Byzantine world, and the Muslims drove them out, and indeed eventually conquered Constantinople. And the Crusaders tried to re-establish their kingdoms, their ancient Byzantine kingdoms.
The first Crusaders from Europe arrived in Israel in 1099, destroying many European Jewish communities on their way to the Holy Land. After besieging Jerusalem, they dealt brutally with the inhabitants, slaughtering the Muslims and burning the Jews alive. They established the capital of the Latin kingdom of the Crusaders in Jerusalem, and apart from the ancient Jebusites who preceded King David, they were the only non-Jewish power to designate Jerusalem as a capital city.
The Crusaders again acted with supreme stupidity by insisting that it must be a purely Christian city and expelling not only Jews, which would have been acceptable, but also Muslims. And then the Muslims said, "Oh, no, that's too much, we're going to take it back," and they did.
Control of the region switched intermittently, with ongoing clashes and truces between Muslim and Christian armies. Neither Israel nor Jerusalem were seen as areas of central importance to the Islamic leaders of the time.
In that period, we have a very, very rich and varied Arabic historical literature, in which they show absolutely no interest at all in the Crusaders. They just weren't worried about it. The fact that the Crusaders were ruling Jerusalem and virtually the whole of Palestine, a sizable chunk of Syria, Lebanon, didn't bother them at all. What really started the counter-crusade was when a Crusader chieftain called Renaud de Chatillon started raiding the Hijaz. He went into the Holy Land of Islam, and that is what really riled them. once the Crusaders committed this supreme foolishness of attacking the Holy Land of Islam, then and only then came the great counterattack. And then you see, not long afterwards, when the Emperor Frederick II went on his crusade, the then ruler of Egypt, Malik al-Kamil, who controlled Palestine, was willing to enter into an agreement with the Holy Roman Emperor, in which he said, in effect, since Jerusalem is so important to you, you can have it, I don't mind. And they simply allowed the Crusaders to take back Jerusalem.
In 1291, the Arab Mamelukes took power, ushering in 250 years of generally passive rule.
The relations between the Jews and the Muslims it always varied. It depended. If you had what we would now call a fundamentalist Muslim regime, and these existed and came up again and again, century after century, then the Jews were in trouble. If you had a mellifluous Muslim regime, which also existed, then the Jews had the status, as Christians did, of dhimmi, second class, but nevertheless second class protected.
During this time, Jews from France and England, and later Spain, Lithuania, Portugal, Sicily, Sardinia, Rhodes, and Naples joined the already existing Jewish communities in Hebron, Jerusalem, and the Galilee, and established additional Jewish communities of learning and commerce all over Israel. Several hundred Northern European rabbis, known as the Ba'alei Tosafot, as well as the famous Spanish rabbi and scholar Nachmanides, known as the Ramban, also established communities. In the 16th century, large numbers of Jews migrated to the northern city of Safed, and it became the largest Jewish population in Israel, with as many as 15,000 Jews, and the center of the development of Jewish mysticism, known as the Kabbalah. Despite this relatively large Jewish presence in the area, Muslim rule was oppressive. Jews were not permitted entry to holy sites such as the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron, where the Jewish patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. This ban continued until the 20th century.